Okay, I've placed my parts here, and I want to show you a good trick to use to make sure that your parts will actually fit on the board without interfering with each other. We'll make an assumption that the models are right, and if I move this part around, it turns green, telling me it's going to hit another part. But sometimes maybe the part you have isn't exactly the part that they have. So let me show you a good trick to use. We're going to come up here to File and Default Prints. I'm going to click Default Prints, and then you'll see I have PCB prints here. I can take my PCB print and do a page setup, and I'm going to tell it, if I just leave it like it is, I can get a preview, and you'll see it'll fit the entire board on a sheet of paper. Maybe not what I want, right? So I'm going to go back to page setup, and I'm going to tell it I want a scaled print, and I want that scaled print to be 1 to 1. See, my scale is 1 to 1 to 1. If I do a preview, it's going to print that PCB on a piece of paper at exactly the size that it really is, including your parts. So I do this on my projects. I print out this piece of paper, I take my parts and I lay them right on top of the paper to make sure that they're not going to overhang each other or hit each other or some way be in some conflict. I can stick it on my printed paper and know for sure this is going to work or not. This will save you some time and effort, because if you don't do that and the parts don't fit, you're going to send for your board, you're going to spend your money, or you're going to wait your time. It's going to come, you're going to stick it on there, they won't fit, and then you'll think, man, I should have printed it out. You know, it took 2 more minutes, but I should have printed it out. So do your default print, lay your parts on there, and make sure they fit. After that, then you can start routing your copper. Let's talk a little bit about PCB routing and rules. Now, the routing is actually placing the copper on the top of the PCB and the bottom of the PCB. Several ways to do this. We can come up here to the toolbar where it says Auto Route, tell it Auto Route All, which means I want all my connections routed. Here's some strategies. The default 2-layer board is probably the most common for projects like this in Design 1. If you're going to get multi-layer boards, you'll see that you have a default multi-layer layout. Here's a default 2-layer with edge connectors. A lot of options. If you can't get things to route with one strategy, you can try another. I'm going to tell it Route All, and you'll see that this little window pops up, and it told me that it completed 27 of 27 connections routed. It's 100%. It did it in less than a second. Routing finished. No contentions. Failed to complete. 0 connections. Now, a contention is one trace trying to go over the top of another, right? And that would actually make a short. That's a contention. But it's telling me everything was fine. I'm just going to hook my messages over here. And now you'll see it's routed. Look at my board. Bottom left, it says top layer is red. Bottom layer is blue. If I decided to zoom in here, you can see here's my top layer. It's red. It's on the top. I have my top layer selected. If I select bottom layer, it shows it above and on top so I can see the bottom layer. So everything routed. And it routed with my default rules. I didn't change any rules. So let's zoom back out. I'll see all my traces here are all the same thickness. If I go to Design and click Rules, I can look at my routing rules, and here's my width rule. My width is telling me that I'm 10 mils. 10 mils max, 10 mils minimum, preferred width 10 mils. That's 0.01 inches, right? 10 thousandths of an inch. That's the default. I'll also have a clearance rule that tells me I can get things as close as 10 thousandths apart. Those are all the default rules. We didn't change anything. Well, let me show you how to change some stuff. We're going to go to Tools and Unroute All. So I unrouted everything. I could have done a Control Z to undo. It would have done the same thing. I've unrouted it all. Let's go to Rules and say I want my circuit board to be a little more robust. I'm going to make my traces 20 thousandths. So now they're all 20 thousandths. And if I tell it to auto route again, just so I can see them, my traces are now twice as fat as they were. This gives me a little bit heavier connection than I had before. The copper being a little heavier, a little wider, I'm going to have less problems with it peeling off the PCB with the boards we make here on campus. So I'll do a Control Z, unroute that. I'll show you another way to route, probably a preferred method. On this toolbar up here it says interactively route connections. So if I select that, I have now a crosshair. I could zoom in and say, let's start here and route. Look, it goes to there, no problem, right? Can I make it go here? I can't even make it go there, right? Because it knows it doesn't connect to ground. It only connects to the points it's supposed to connect to. So I click again. I have that routed. I can keep routing. I'm routed to here. And where else does it need to go? Well, looks like it needs to go down here somewhere. If I wanted to, I could make it route like this, right? You see what I'm doing? I'm just clicking it in there and forcing it to route in a certain direction. Let's see, it wants to come. Let's see, I can make it come over here. So now I've routed that by hand. Sometimes you want to route by hand, and in bigger projects you definitely want to route by hand. In this case, I don't need to route by hand. But I want to show you that's how you do it. That's where you can change your routing. Here's where you can add a pad or add a via. A via is what the board uses to go from one layer to the other. If I'm on the bottom layer and I need to go to the top, I place a via, and that drills a little hole, puts a little pad. I can show you a picture of that. Let's go here to, let's see, Layer Stack Manager. If I look at the Layer Stack Manager, this is giving me a representation of my board and showing me all the layers. There's bottom overlay, the bottom solder, right? That's a mask. That's the green layer that you see, right? So the overlay's the text. This is that green layer that covers up all the traces to protect them. Here's the bottom copper. The dielectric that you see here is the fiberglass that the board's made out of, and then the opposite going up, right? Copper. But let's click this 3D, and you kind of get a picture then. Now you can see the board, right? There's my overlays, my solder mask, my copper. It's a little easier to see. So I'm going to show you how to make a couple more changes. I'm going to go back to my schematic, and I'm going to make a change that says if it's a ground net, I want that net to be 30 mils. So let's go up to place, and under place there's one that says directives, because I want to place a directive in here that's going to direct it to do something, and it says PCB layout. Now I have this little part that I can place. I'm going to hit the tab key before I place it so I can change the rule. I'm going to edit the rules, edit the rule values, width constraint. I'm going to open it up. I'm going to tell it I want this to be 30 so that my ground traces are fatter than the other traces. And I'll place that on my ground net. I'll save it, and you'll see when I do update PCB document, it says what's it doing? It's adding a rule. I'll execute it. The rule is now added to my design by placing it on the PCB. If I look in my rules now, look at there, schematic width constraint. That one says 30. And it's 30 for my ground nets only. See, where the object matches this net and its ground. There we go. So now if I tell it to route all, what do we get? Well, here's a ground net. It's obviously thicker, so if I double click this trace, it'll tell me which net it is, right? It's a top layer, it's a minus 12 volt DC net, and it's 20 mils. We double click this one and it tells me it's 30 mils. It's a top layer and it's ground. So you'll see how I was able to do that. I was able to change my rules by adding it on the PCB on the schematic side, or I can change them on the PCB side. So there we go, top layer, bottom layer. I might want to add some holes to mount this board with. There's a few ways to do that. A nice way is to come over here and place 4 pads in the schematic and hook them up to ground. That's what I usually do. You don't have to. But I can come to my library. Here's connectors. Let's just say I go to devices. An antenna happens to be a single pin, right? I can add that. I don't think they have any like mounting holes in here. I could place that on there and it would place a little part on there and I could hook it to ground. Just like this. Now that says antenna, but I might want it to say something different. I want it to say mount. Let's just come in here. We'll paste that in. Paste that one in. I use cut and paste, it's faster. I make less mistakes. I'm going to put ground here. I'm going to wire these together. I'm going to use my tools and annotate the schematic, so those now have numbers. I'm going to save it. I'm going to update my PCB. And there's my 4 mounting holes. Alright, so let me just place them roughly in the corners. That looks good. Of course, the pad size will matter and the hole size will matter. Depends on what you're trying to put in there. Certain screw size or whatever, you'll want to make sure you get the holes right. Now, let's see. This one I'll put up here. It's a little upset because it's in the way here, so it turned green. I'll just place it over here. Alright, now if we look at those, I've placed them, but they're not routed. Easiest thing to do is auto route all, route all. I'll route those back in. So now those are routed, and I can look at my board. I see my board here and my parts. Now, let me show you a trick. If I hit the number 3, it's going to show me a board in a different view. And if I hold down Shift and Spacebar at the same time, I can then hold down my right mouse key and rotate that board around and look at it. See what it looks like. When I'm done looking at that, I can hit the number 2 and go back to 2D mode. So I have 2D mode, 3D mode. There's a 1. If you press that down, it shows you the layer stack regions. We don't use that very often, but just the 2 and the 3 are the most common. So I have this stuff routed. I can see how it's routed. Let's say I want to make a change so I can show you what a via is. If I look at my PCB here and see these traces, maybe I want to come across here with this trace and change its layer. See, I double click the trace. It shows me all the attributes and properties. I tell it I want you to be a bottom layer. And now look, this is going across the bottom. This one's on the top. but they're not connected. No way to connect them. So I can come up here and tell it place a via. I'm going to hit the tab key and tell it I want it to be on the ground net, because that's the net we're mounting here. And you'll see I can place it here. And now this goes on the bottom layer, comes up through the board, through the via to the top layer. If I go to 3D mode, there's my via. And that's what's getting that trace from one layer to the other. All right, let's space this out. All right, so now I can look here and see I have the things routed. I have ways to mount it. We showed how we can route and unroute. I showed that I can double click any of these and get their properties. Maybe I want to do one more thing. I'm going to select top layer and I'm going to tell it place a string. See where it says string? I'm going to hit the tab key and say this is Mike's board and it's version 1.0. And now look, I can place that in copper on the board. The good thing about doing that is I can identify my board and my version, and I'm not relying on the top overlays, which we can't produce here. If you ship your board out, you'll get it. But if we do it here, you won't have that. Now I just wrote my name on here, and I can see it, and I know who it belongs to. All right, well, that'll be enough for this video. We'll end here, and then the next video we'll talk about how to do copper pours and some more about rules and clearance constraints, and then we'll generate our files. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.